Boker Tov Ve'Gud Shabbos. This is Parashah number 32 and 33, on the mount and by my regulations. This week's Parashah addresses Shemitah, which means loosen or detach, which is the 7th year of which we're in this year. Man's given 6 years to work the land and plant the crops, 6 representing the number of man in Gematria. However, on the 7th year, we are to let the land rest and recover. We've not done that in any sense of the word. We just keep taking. And it's catching up with us now. It's a complete rest for the land, just as Shabbat is to be a complete rest for man. If we don't understand the concept of complete rest for ourselves, how are we going to understand it for the land or anything else? We're not to harvest what grows by itself from the seeds left from the previous harvest, or grapes that grow from an unintended vine or untended vine. However, what the land produces during the year of Shemitah can be eaten. So the logical question is, what's the difference? So first we talk about where these orders were given for Shemitah, and most of them were given in the tent of meeting. The reference to untended grapevines teaches us that the owner may not harvest, store, or sell the yield, but it may be consumed by his families and others within the community. The land's rest in the 7th year reminds us that the determining factor in material human success is God, and not the law of nature or man's self-worth. Everything we're given is from God. The sages tell us that true life comes when man stops striving for material gain in favor of dedication to observing God's Torah out of love and obedience. Giving up that extra morning nap and coming to Shabbat and then going home and having a Shabbat nap. We got to get our priorities right. And our priority never change, should never change. It should be God first and foremost, always. And everything else will follow. By our observance of Shabbat and Shemitah, we infuse holiness and purpose into our work, no matter what our occupation is. I'm sure you've seen it. People who truly love God, whether you're considered lowest on the chain of occupations, I don't know what that is. I don't know a lowest. I don't. But in the economy of things, you might say a janitor or a sanitation engineer, a garbage man, whatever. Okay, and on the highest end, you might say Doctor, Lawyer, Indian Chief. I don't know what you want to call that. But those who truly love God, no matter what in that spectrum, you see that joy reflected in how they perform their job because they love God. This command provides further support that God is the author of the Torah because he guarantees the year before Shemitah, he will order his blessing over the land, and there'll be enough harvest on the 6th year for 3 years. What are they doing over there now? Many, the majority of them are not observing Shemitah. And they're arguing we can't support the economy and our families and all. But there are a few, at least one that I know, that does the hydroponic gardening. And it's being blessed because he's not planting it in the land. God will hold traditional Jews or anyone else who are in the land, especially accountable for not observing Shemitah. This blessing is conditional on keeping God's regulations, rulings, and acting accordingly. There you go. No human can make such a prediction with validity or reliability. During the Shemitah year, it's forbidden for owners of the land to treat it as their own and forbid others to benefit from the available food. Owners, Gentiles, and animals must all have equal access. Well, I'll tell you, at my house, the birds get more access to my grapevines than I do. I see them when they first start, that's the end of it. They're gone. It's a race to the finish. I think they're muscadine grapes, but I wouldn't know. You'd have to ask the birds. After all, the land truly belongs to Hashem. We're merely stewards of all he allows us to use during our lives, and boy, have we blown it as a world. The food cannot be harvested for commercial use. Leviticus 25:23 reminds us that God owns the land. Therefore, it's never to be sold. Again, they have violated that. Tel Aviv, you can buy land. and the apartment. It used to be you could just buy an apartment or a townhouse or a little building somewhere and not the land. But now they sell land over there. This is the basis for the general prohibition against owning land in Israel. Unfortunately, there are many who choose to override it. There are others who farm the land, as I was telling you about, in direct violation of what God says. And there is no valid excuse. People will give excuses for everything. Like Rabbi used to say, minimize, justify, and rationalize everything. I didn't come to Shabbat because da-da-da-da-da. I didn't pay my bill on time because da-da-da-da-da. Well, sometimes for some things there may be a valid excuse, but the outcome is the same, and people don't really want to hear it. You're either there or not there. You pay your bill or you didn't pay your bill. What the object of the game is to learn to understand with compassion and not assume that somebody just wasn't there or didn't pay their bill because they didn't want to. There are a lot of times when extenuating circumstances prohibit us from doing what we should be doing. This practice is directly driven by greed and not trusting the God of Israel. That is going ahead and planting things in the ground and doing the things God says we're not to do. We're allowed to eat the fruit of what has already been planted intentionally in the Shemitah year, but we cannot eat from the seedlings that unintentionally fell and produced from the previous year's harvest. God set up an economic framework that necessarily contains a moral, ethical code and universal blueprint. It is infallible. It's infallible. What a book that we have to guide our lives. But people still say, oh, he didn't know what it was like to go through this, that, or the other. He was God, but he was all human and tempted in every way as we are. It says so, and I believe him. Every way. But look, he was able to keep the Torah. That's proof that we would be able to keep the Torah, but we're not there. We don't have that level of faith, trust, and obedience. But we grow. That's the object of the game for us, to grow. Continue to grow. This concept stands in striking contrast to the postmodern values clarification system promoted and taught in our schools and practiced in our society. Johnny, whatever you think is right is right. Well, Johnny's mind might change tomorrow. So his right changes and his sense of wrong changes. We see it in the government. It's so obvious. We say our government should be transparent. They're transparent in a way that they don't even comprehend. Anybody who's looking and has any knowledge of God can see what's going on. Mm-hmm. What's right for our president changes daily based on his rules and standards that are not based on God's standards. Some examples include his stance on gay marriage, immigration, taxes, justice on all counts, and so on. God demands respect for human dignity, not license to do whatever we may feel is acceptable in our own eyes at the moment. We see all kinds of backing down from different things because of high pressure from minority groups that are quickly becoming the majority. I am tired of having gay rights shoved down my throat every time I turn on TV or the news. It is wrong. It is an abomination according to God's Torah, Old and New Testament. I don't care how you look at it. It is what it is. And God will have his day with these people. Man's wisdom leads to death, and God makes this truth very clear in the following passages, just to list a few. Isaiah 55:9 says, "For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." Proverbs 14:12, "There is a way that seemeth right unto man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." And Proverbs 16:25, "There is a way that seemeth right unto man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." So it's listed more than one place. Another example in the context of buying and selling property, Corinthians 1:19 reads, "For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent." So people who think they know it all, got it figured out, he's going to show them exactly where they stand. In opposition to the American way that allowed people to purchase houses above and beyond what they could afford just a few years ago, God does not promote an ideal that says it's okay to buy now and pay later. This is why we're in the mess we're in. Not only did we want to do it because our animal souls want something now, when we see something pretty or better or bigger, but the government fostered it. Come in, we'll approve you for a $200,000 house, even though you might only be able to afford a $50,000 house. Here's the loan. And now we're starting to see, my brother pointed this out, a lot more signs for unsecured loans. He goes, the banks are asking for a problem. I said, yeah, they are. Unsecured loans. So here we go again. We've learned nothing. No one should be a slave to his or her employer or anyone else. Unfortunately, many people are. It's one of the saddest things I see in my practice, having 50-some-year-old nurses' aides and people in other professions coming in because of back pain and anxiety and health problems that can affect people in their 50s, aggravated by lifting people in their 50s and beyond as patients and not being able to handle it. They're afraid to leave because if they take time off for sickness, there's somebody in the wings saying, here I am, take me. And they'll hire the next warm body until that one's worn out. And they have no retirement. These people have no retirement. So what are they going to do? We see this enslavement everywhere. Some people owe so much money to various creditors, they can never hope to retire. They work in a job they hate, while their employers add more work and more work with no change in pay, or hiring others to lighten the load. You see it everywhere. Every profession is such like that. After all, they know, as I said, there are many unemployed people who are waiting in line. I submit that that number is decreasing because the government is sustaining people more and more and more and making them more dependent on the government. When you can get more in unemployment and food stamps and these other welfare resources than you can work in the job you were, the animal soul will say, I'm taking that. The godly soul says, no, I'm not going to be dependent on the government or anybody. I will work at my job as soon as it's available, or another job. But that's that overcoming that human nature that I talk about all the time. Our tendency would want to stay home and play, and live off the government. But I'm telling you that when the government has enough people in this country under its wings, so to speak, it's going to crush them and the country. How can you argue with the person that's feeding you? So it's not good. The snowball effect ends with an avalanche of increased individual and social stress, fear, illness, anger, and death because they don't follow God's Torah. And that's what he said. You all read it in the Aliyah. That it's conditional. If you follow my ways, I will provide. This is a direct cause and effect scenario, unlike what Nancy Kennedy and everybody else seems to write about, that we don't have to do anything. He'll come knocking on our door, and he'll come take us and do all of these things for us without us doing anything. Hallelujah. Not so. The crux of the command of Shemitah and Shabbat for man, animal, and land is that no man is an army of one, and all God's creation needs rest. I used to see people in Kentucky working their mules to where they had sores on their little shoulders. Not even patting them and just working them and working them and working them. I said, when that mule dies, what are you going to do? Use your wife? Have her pull it? God makes a point to inform us that he rested on the seventh day. Who are we to think that we don't need to observe the same practice, especially when he commands it, whether he did or not? We're responsible for promoting the welfare of another, including animals in the land. That means helping others to independence in the case of people, not making them dependent on us. Too many people are in for self-aggrandizement and saying, I got this person a job. I provided this for this person. Look what I did for this person. Forget it. You're not going to get any rewards from God for that. And the poor person is probably humiliated and embarrassed and everything else. The idea is to help them become independent themselves. That's the Jewish way. That's the biblical way. Those who are blessed by God, and anyone who has anything has it at God's unmerited kindness. With more than they need, should share with others who have less. I thought it was interesting in the stamp out hunger. We're never going to stamp out hunger, by the way. But it's a nice gesture that they're collecting food today. And one of the signs I saw said, no rusted cans, no, things that imply that people give less than their best. I mean, you can go to the dollar store, for God's sake, and buy some beans and peas or something and throw them in the bag that are fresh. Instead of pulling something like Jell-O or whatever it is you might have bought 6 months ago and never ate. But people do that. They clean out their cabinet time, In Judaism, it's a matter of justice. They talked about that on the film last night. Tzedakah, is justice and not charity. This is what the concept of tzedakah entails. It's the right thing to do. Not like, look what I'm doing for you. Making you feel above and beyond somebody else because you're giving something. It's our duty to do that. God is our provider. Yahweh Yireh, as was first called by Abraham. That's God is provider. If we tout ourselves as being his descendants, the hospitality for which Abraham is known should be manifest in us. We claim to have him as a father, as an ancestor, but do we do as he does, as he did? That's another question. We are not responsible for the free will choices others make. All right, we can encourage, we can do tzedakah, but we're not responsible for ultimate choices. Sometimes it's hard to watch your loved ones be rebellious against God. As a nurse practitioner, it's hard for me to sit there for 20 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 times a month with a patient and give them the same instructions and have them come back with problems that are the result of them not following those instructions, when it would have been so easy to avoid the problem in the first place. But they don't. The subsequent Parashah describes God's blessings for living and observing his Torah and curses for choosing not to listen or obey them. He does this throughout the Bible, but you see it a lot in the Parashot, one after another. If you do this, tell Moshe to tell the people, but if you do this, and I say this over and over and over again, and we still don't get it as a world. One would think that when these were given, there would be no question about listening, internalizing, and acting upon the commands of God, especially when they saw so many miracles. I mean, they saw, how could you not follow him? But they didn't, and neither do we. With all the information we have about the New Testament, Brit Kadeshah information we have about what's coming, and if we don't follow his commands, where we're going to be headed, and what's going to happen to us, I'll do it later. It's a bunch of baloney. We'll see what happens. I got a good retirement. I've got a big 401k or whatever. I don't have any 401k. But many people do. And that's not a bad thing that you've been wise enough to save money for a 401k, but don't depend on it. That's the point. You depend on him, not your 401k. May we not let the opportunity for growth in God's Torah slip away to our ultimate destruction because we procrastinated or didn't take him seriously. 2000, 2001, and 2007 and 8 were the last 2 Shemitah years. Look at the events that happened to this country because it did not follow God's laws. 2001, the Twin Towers were destroyed. That was the symbol of American materialism. Pow! How quick. I don't know if people were in horror because of the death and destruction or the realization that they can get us. We are not immortal. We are not untouchable. I think it was a little bit of both. I really do. 2007 and 8, the widely watched, the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit a pre-recession all-time high on October 9th, 2007, closing at 14,164.43. Less than 18 months later, it had fallen more than 50%. 18 is a significant number in Gematria. This wasn't the largest decline in history during the Great Depression. The stock market took a 90% hit, but it was more vicious. It took only 18 months, while the fall of the Depression took over 3 years. While 18 may be interpreted as meaning a new beginning, it also signifies bondage. from which new beginnings often occurred. Right? Everybody, the presidents all say, let's put our country at war, and then things will get better. I don't know about that. It did in some cases, but values were different in previous wars than they are now. This particular type of bondage is mentioned 18 times in Scripture. How about that? It's mentioned in Exodus 20, the chapter that first delineates God's commandments in the context of the first commandment. After the word bondage/slavery, God commands the children of Israel, that's true believers, not just Jews, and not Jews as many people think of Jews, biological Jews. It is Jews as defined by Yeshua. Not to worship other gods. Serving other gods places people into spiritual bondage under Hasatan and his demons, which God punishes with physical bondage. In order for people to reconsider their ways and repent. That's spiritual timeout. Could America and other societies that are increasingly rebellious against God be headed for the same fate? I think so. Time will tell. But if history serves us correctly, and I believe all historical accounts in God's Torah are reliable and valid, the worst is yet to come. Our Haftarah, Jeremiah 32, 6 through 27. Once again, we see the consistency of God's Torah running like an unbroken ribbon throughout the book. This Haftarah is no exception. The punishments that await those who choose to disregard God's Torah are contrasted with those who are obedient. Jeremiah rebukes the Israelites for their idolatrous ways and for their lack of faith in God. This is not unlike what we see in American society and many other societies today. Jeremiah conveys God's words of wrath for those who do not trust God, and we know what trust is, I hope, in this synagogue by now. Taking off the life jacket and jumping when God says jump. And knowing that He'll catch us. Not hoping, knowing that He'll catch us. Think for a moment on what Jeremiah must have thought when God told him to tell the Israelites of what was to come and of his own imprisonment. Just think about that. When we have an ingrown toenail, why me? You know? Why not somebody else? I like to walk every day. Why me? Poor Jeremiah put in prison, and it wasn't fun. Those weren't nice television prisons with whatever, the workouts and the food and all. They were damp, dark, yucky places with chains and mean people. And that's how God protected them. So that, we can't imagine what he must have thought. He must have had some mental conflicts and lots of questions, unless he was so attuned that his trust was unwavering. We need to think about the following passage and consider where we are in the spiritual scheme of things. This is right from the Torah. Cursed is the man who trusts in man and relies on mortal flesh for his strength, and whose heart turns away from God. Do we do that? He shall be like a lone tree in the desert, and will not see when good comes, and will dwell on parched land in the desert, on salt-sodden soil that is not habitable. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, to whom God will be his trust. For he shall be like a tree planted by the water, and which spreads its roots out into a stream, so that it will not be affected when heat comes. And its leaves shall be green, and in the year of drought it will not be anxious, neither shall it cease from bearing fruit. That's how we're supposed to be. Well grounded in God's Torah. And when something comes, don't get all excited and afraid going, did you see what happened such and such a place? Wow, I don't understand all these tsunamis, tornadoes, earthquakes, da da da. Well, the one who's well grounded in Torah will go, he said it would happen, and here it is. And you'll have peace. Your blood pressure won't go up. Your heart rate won't go up. Your sugar won't go up. You'll be fine. And in the meantime, while you've got all this peace, you're going, well, how come aren't you upset? Peter, why aren't you upset about it? Well, because God's Torah says these things are going to come, and maybe you'll plant a seed. Maybe we'll get blamed for causing it, like the plague. But if we have to die for God, so be it. The Haftarah ends with a passage we would do well to memorize or place where we can ponder it daily. And it says, God who is the source of the hopes of Israel, all that forsake you shall be shamed, and they who turn away from me shall be marked out on the earth, that they have forsaken God, the source of living waters. Heal me, O God, then I shall be healed. Keep in mind, healed doesn't necessarily mean cure. If you're thinking along that context, it's spiritual healing. Help me, then I shall be helped, for you are my praise. Again, we see the purpose for our lives, that God may be glorified and praised, that all the nations will know that He is Adonai. Let's not waste our time engaging and listening to all the media hype about the end of the world, the ancient aliens, and why we should seek to communicate with them, chemical-laced contrails, or anything else that distracts us from what we should be doing, studying God's Torah. If there's a chemical-laced contrail, may Hashem protect the faithful from being affected by it. Let it go. Don't get distracted by these things. It distracts so many people from what we should be doing. If we sincerely are concerned about the future, we need to look no farther than God's Torah for the answers on how to prepare. This isn't beyond our reach. We need to place our trust and obedience with the Creator of the universe. There is no higher authority. In our Brit Parashah, we go to 1 Corinthians 7:21 through 24. It says, were you a slave when you were called? Well, don't let it bother you. Although if you can gain your freedom, take advantage of the opportunity. For a person who was a slave when he was called is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, someone who was a free man when he was called is a slave to the Messiah. You were bought at a price. I hate it when people say, it's all free. You don't have to do nothing. It's an unmerited gift. There's a big difference between free and an unmerited kindness of God. It costs. Freedom costs. It costs for our physical freedom. Look at all these guys coming back in pieces. Look at all the people who died in all these wars that we've had over the years. Tell somebody who's lost somebody that that's free. You were bought at a price, so don't become slaves of other human beings. Brothers, let each one remain with God in the condition in which he was called. For a person who was a slave when he was called is the Lord's free man. This statement has application in the physical and spiritual realm. We're not to place ourselves in any position in which we become slaves to human masters, as we've learned from the Parashah. This includes monetary or any other type of indebtedness. If you're in debt, get out of it as fast as you can. I've got a student loan that I'll probably be paying from heaven. You know, I do. But I'm paying it, you know, as much as I can, whenever I can. I'm paying it regularly. I'm doing what God says. You know, I'm paying it diligently. I'm honest about it and all of that. But yeah, it's a big one. I pray I'll graduate and use the degree for His glory. You know, maybe that will make it all better. So this includes monetary or any other type of indebtedness. Recall the scenario earlier in the Parashah where a slave takes an awl, like a ring, in his ear as a sign that he chooses to remain a slave to his human master. This is not a situation that we should voluntarily submit to. That is not an honorable thing, to want to be a slave to the man when it's time to be freed. Similarly, when God is offering us a way, Yeshua is offering us a way to be reconciled to God, we don't remain servants to the world. We need to take advantage of that freedom and go. If we find ourselves physically imprisoned, we can gain spiritual freedom by choosing to follow His Torah. We may still remain behind physical bars, but we're spiritually free. Read about Paul and all those who were put in prison. Jeremiah. Once we choose to follow God's Torah, we also become free to serve Him, even if it's spiritually and not physically. You could be a quadriplegic. It'd be one of the best testimonies for God ever. We used to have a guy who came when he could. He was a quadriplegic, young guy. 25 years he was a quadriplegic. And he loved God. He called me almost every day, asking me a question about the Parashah. And he studied. And he was a good man. And I'm sure that he is walking around up there like nobody's business now. He did everything he could to learn about God's Torah and follow it. Never did I hear a bad word out of that guy's mouth. He's certainly higher on the hierarchy, if you will, of those up there than I would ever be. Never said anything bad about anybody. Yeshua's sacrifice freed us from automatic death indictment that would have been imposed had we continued to follow the ways of the world. At this point, we become a slave of the Messiah, for we are bought at a price. And as I said, freedom is not free. The evidence is Yeshua's sacrifice, so often taken for granted and misunderstood. People paint such pretty, benign pictures of that sometimes. They just talk about it like it was an incidental event. And it wasn't. You were bought with a price, so do not become slaves of other human beings. Brothers, let each one remain with God in the condition in which he was called. People are called by God in many different situations. Look at poor Shaul on a dirt road on a donkey. And he had to be blinded so that he could see the truth. Well, how ironic is that? Sometimes we have to be struck with disease, illness, sickness, something, to put us flat on our back so we'll finally look up. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes people are really searching and can't find, and God will provide the way. So we can't be judgmental about this. Mary was summoned by an angel. Moshe was called by the burning bush that wasn't consumed. Joseph had a dream. We must be ready to take every opportunity given to us to serve God where and when He chooses to ask us to. Remember, Hineni, I am here. Behold, I am here. Hineni Adonai. Do we make ourselves available to Him? Do we boldly say Hineni? Be careful if you do, because He may call you in ways that you don't expect. I promise you, many times He does. This following teaching is a teaching which shows the concept of this week's lesson. I didn't put the word there, but this teaching format is called, does anybody know what the format is called? Teaching format in Judaism? Haggadah. Okay. Trace its roots. The cause that is thus producing want in the midst of plenty, ignorance in the midst of intelligence, aristocracy and democracy, weakness and strength, that is giving to our civilization a one-sided and unstable development. And you will find it something which a Hebrew statesman made 3,000 years ago, he perceived and guarded against. That's Moshe. He saw that the real cause of enslavement of the masses of Egypt was that everywhere produced enslavement, possessing by a class of the land upon which and from which the whole people must live. He saw that to permit in land the same unqualified private ownership that by natural right attaches to things produced by labor would be inevitably to separate people into the very rich and the very poor. Look around us. Inevitably to enslave labor, again, around us. Everywhere in the Mosaic institutions is the land treated as a gift of the Creator to His common creatures, which no one has the right to monopolize. Everywhere it is not your estate, it is not your property, not the land which you bought, or the land which you conquered, but the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess. Future tense, not yet realized. Although there are some who acknowledge the divine source of these regulations, many now denounce them as old-fashioned, irreligious, and communistic. Some hold these regulations as socialistic in their support of the current president. One big difference is ignored by these supporters. Theocracy run by God cannot be compared to a dictatorship run by man. It will not be successful simply because of human greed in all of its flavors and colors. that will display itself until the Messiah establishes his kingdom once and for all. Compare this teaching to the philosophy of American political leadership currently in place and consider how nothing has changed. In fact, it's gotten worse, just as Messiah Yeshua said it would, and will continue to wax and wane. Well, it will wax worse. The establishment of the third temple and Moshiach's rule will be the only remedy for this situation, and I pray that it happen in our lifetimes. Shabbat Shalom. More information can be gathered from other teachings and studies. Questions that can be submitted to the website www.rabdavis.org. Shabbat Shalom.